Down there is the biggest sports building project in the Western world. That's where the 2012 Olympics are going to be staged. The Olympic Park will fill 2.5 square kilometres with some of the most modern sporting venues anywhere on the planet. Like other human activities, sport has made its mark on London's buildings. And some places where Londoners go to let off steam or cheer on their favourite team have acquired almost mythical status, like Lord's and Wembley. But there are other sporting venues, like this, where sport's been played for much longer than at either of those places. Tennis has been played here for 500 years. Real tennis, that is. This is Hampton Court, and real tennis, the forerunner of modern lawn tennis, with very different rules, has been played here for longer than anywhere else in the world. There is one court that claims to be older than this. It's at Falkland Palace in Scotland. But that's only because the existing court here was rebuilt by Charles I in 1626. The first court here was actually built by Cardinal Wolsey in 1527. It was an outdoor court, wooden, a bit like my tennis, really. If I'd been around back in the 1500s, my opponent could have been Henry VIII. Today, it's Chris Ronaldson, 3 times world champion. In this game, you can use the walls and the roof of the penthouse, as it's called. You can win a point by ringing the bell of the end gallery, or by hitting Henry's face. The rackets and balls are quite different from those in ordinary tennis. The racket's about the size of a squash racket, and the balls have a lot less bounce than ordinary tennis balls. Yeah! Oh, it's a winner! I know how Henry VIII must have felt. Oh, wow. Chris, how different was the game in Henry VIII's day?
The main differences were it was largely a summer game because there were no artificial lights. And when Henry played on the court that's in this position now, it was open air and wooden, so he would only have played in good weather.
Yes, very wise, as it wouldn't have been much fun in the rain. It would be a bit dodgy.
And there's a great deal of evidence that if you go back that far, it was a huge gambling game, not just on the result of the match, but actually on each point. And so you used to find spectators and watchers all over the court as well.
On the court?
Actually on court, yes.
And there's some story about Anne Boleyn.
The legend is that Henry was playing tennis here when news was brought to him that she had been successfully beheaded.
Right.
But the true story is that she was watching a match at Whitehall and was angry to find that she was being hauled off the tower before she could collect her winnings.
Wonderful. Henry wasn't the only king to play here, and royals still do. Though that hasn't changed, the palace certainly has. Charles I, as we know, rebuilt the tennis court and put a roof on it. While William III was defeating foreign dignitaries on the tennis court, Sir Christopher Wren was rebuilding much of the south and eastern part of the palace. The Victorians re-Tudorised much of the front of the building that the Georgians had modernised, and though Queen Victoria didn't play, God forbid, Prince Albert certainly did. Actually, his locker is still here. Look at this. Oh no, perhaps you'd better not. Less than 20 miles away on the other side of London is a very different world. This is London's East End. Not much tennis here, this is boxing country. The Repton Boys Club has been part of the heritage of London's East End for more than 100 years. It's produced a string of successful professional and Olympic boxers. Its chairman is David Robinson.
If you don't box, you play football. It's as simple as that. You don't get no many cricket stars or tennis stars come out of the East End of London. Traditionally here, the Repton is your history-looking ranger.
Up the road is the house where Daniel Mendoza lived, an English bare-knuckle boxing champion and the first in a long tradition of East End fighters. Just a stone's throw away is York Hall, a building dear to the boxing lovers of Bethnal Green and indeed the rest of London. There are more famous venues like the Albert Hall or the Wembley Arena or the XL Centre, but they cater for all sorts of events, and this place is much more personal. York Hall was opened in 1929 by King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, then Duke and Duchess of York, hence the name. Perhaps this place seems personal because Everyone is so close to the ring and it gets so noisy. Or maybe because boxing is so much of what this hall and the community around is about. This is the main hall where all the fights take place. It's being renovated at the moment and restored to its former glory. And the chap who knows all about it is from Tower Hamlets Council, Paul Martindale. Paul, what famous boxers have fought here?
Locally, we've had Charlie Magri, who went on to become world bantamweight champion, John H. Stracey, who became world welterweight champion, Nigel Benn's been in here, and also many other fighters come across just to watch. I've actually seen Marvin Hagler in this hall, Lennox Lewis. Virtually every famous fighter has passed through these steps.
Although York Hall may be famous for boxing, its origins lie in the campaign to improve public health. All over Britain, around the end of the 19th century, buildings like this provided a place for the less fortunate to wash their clothes and themselves. And with a supply of water, why not somewhere to swim? Underneath that floor is a swimming pool not seen for half a century. That's the floor of the boxing ring right above my head. It's wonderful, all the old tiles down here. I'm just coming into the deep end. I'd have to go up there to get into the air. So I better draw a deep breath so I can get up and change ends. By the time York Hall was built, swimming was already an established sport. The first Olympics in which events were held in a pool rather than a lake or river were the 1908 Games in London. As well as a sport, swimming was becoming highly popular as recreational exercise, especially outdoors. This is the London Fields Lido. It was first opened in 1932 and it's just been reopened after being closed for 20 years. And it's been refurbished at a cost of £2.5 million. It's the first heated, open-air, Olympic-sized pool in London. Come on in, the water's lovely.
London sees the opening of yet another Lido, this time in the East End. It's cost £25,000 and surprisingly enough, so far none of the ratepayers has gone off the deep end.
There were once more than 70 outdoor pools right across London. Their heyday was in the 1930s, but they proved costly to run. Many of them fell into disrepair over the decades, and some of them, like the one at Victoria Park and this one's twin at Kennington Park, were closed and eventually filled in. Very sad. But if you're talking swimming pools, have a look at this one at the Crystal Palace Sports Complex, complete with diving pool. It was actually built in time for the 1964 Olympics, but unfortunately the Olympic Games went to Tokyo and we didn't get them. Londoners did at least get a state-of-the-art sports venue.
The Crystal Palace National Recreation Centre is a switched-on modern boon to Britain's sportsmen. It's a centre which caters for almost every type of sporting endeavour and boasts an amphitheatre stadium.
In 1964, when it was opened, it exuded the new sense of civic pride of the time. Designed by Leslie Martin under the auspices of the now long-gone London County Council, it used the same combination of concrete and glass as Martin's most famous building, the Royal Festival Hall. Alongside the main building housing the pool and sports hall was the athletics track and stadium. Some of the world's greatest athletes have competed here, and all the British favourites, including Seb Coe, Jonathan Edwards, Mary Peters, Paula Radcliffe and Kelly Holmes. For many people, this became the home of British athletics. The track was the first 400-metre circuit in Britain and the first to have a tartan synthetic surface. The track's been relaid since then, the last time in 2004, and the chap who did it was Andy Shaw. Now, what is it, this track?
Basically, it's a mixture of polyurethane adhesives, and in the base layer, this black granule.
So what's this made of?
This is made from truck tyres. It's a reconstituted truck tyre, granulated up with all the fibre and the metal taken out of it. On top, we mix a red polyurethane and screed that out on top, and then cast into it as it begins to cure this red granule, which is man-made. Right.
So you wind up with a sort of cushion like this, which even I can feel it squidge with my finger.
Yes, that's
so it
correct.
really is good underfoot. I can feel it, walking about.
Certainly, yeah.
Why bother with synthetic track? I mean, Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile on cinders.
Cinder tracks are slower, and what you're looking for with athletes is a uniformity of performance, and only synthetic athletics tracks will give you that.
Since Roger Bannister and the arrival of the synthetic track, his sub-4 minute mile record has been broken by nearly 17 seconds. Athletics and the National Sports Centre wasn't the start of Crystal Palace's history as a sports venue. Where I'm standing now used to be a football ground. In fact, the FA Cup final was played here every year between 1895 and 1914. In 1913, 122,000 people crammed into the stands to watch. There was also a cricket ground, and the famous cricketer W.G. Grace played for the London County Cricket Club. There was even a motor racing circuit, but sadly, the last meeting was in 1972. There are fears that the Sports Centre will go the same way as the motor racing circuit. For the moment, its future seems secure, at least until 2012 and the building of the new facilities for the Olympics. Lords. Old Father Time has been looking down on the home of cricket for over 80 years. But in the history of Lords, he's just a newcomer. The oldest surviving part of the ground is the Pavilion, founded in 1889, and in it is a portrait of the man after whom the ground was named. Thomas Lord was an entrepreneur and a cricket enthusiast. In the 18th century, he moved from his home at Diss in Norfolk down to London to make a fortune. Now, in those days, cricket was a game for aristocracy and the rich, and they hated playing in open fields where ordinary people could come and noisily shout at them and hurl abuse. And so Lord agreed to rent some land on which they could play cricket in private. That was where Dorset Square is now, in Marylebone, hence the Marylebone Cricket Club, the MCC, and its first match was in 1787. In 1814, Lords came here to the site of a duck pond in St John's Wood. In the early days, they used a flock of sheep to keep the grass mowed. There don't seem to be any here today. But in 1864, they got their own groundsman, complete with a mowing machine. This is arguably the most famous room in sporting history. It's called the Long Room, and it's where all the members can sit and watch the game going on. And it's also a gallery of the sporting greats. Down at the end there, perhaps the most famous of all, W.G. Grace. In the museum at Lords are exhibits dating back to cricket's beginning. As to the origin of the word, Lords goes for the shepherd boys playing with their crooks theory, crook cricket. The most famous thing in the museum is this, the urn containing the ashes. Well, I have to say it's not the real thing. The real thing is locked away in a glass case. At the heart of the Ashes story is Ivo Bligh. In 1882, his English team lost to an Australian side for the first time. The press talked of the death of English cricket and suggested the body be cremated and the ashes sent to Australia. Within a year, Ivo led another team on tour to Australia and promptly won 2 tests. Some Melbourne ladies thought it would be jolly fun to burn a bale and give him some real ashes to take home. Never a trophy, they've become a symbol of the struggle for cricketing supremacy between the two countries. The curator at Lords is Glenys Williams, and she showed me a bat taken on England's first tour of Australia in 1861. It's very light, isn't it?
It is. It's a very early splice.
But it is a splice.
It is a splice.
It hasn't changed in all that time.
Not a great deal. When you look at the very early bats, they were very different. They were curved and much heavier.
Wonderful. Well, perhaps you better put it back before I break it. Thank you. And I'll be really interested to see how they make bats today. First, choose your tree. Willow, of course. J.S. Wrights are the largest and oldest supplier of willow for cricket bats in the world. And for every tree they cut down, they plant another 2. The company has been operating from its yard at Great Lees in Essex since Jesse Wright started the business in 1894. Oliver Wright is Jesse's great-grandson. Oliver, what happens when the trees come back to the yard?
The first process is they're lined up there and they're cross-cut with the big chainsaws. From there they go into the splitting shed where the bark's taken off and they're split into a rough shape of a cricket bat. They're then waxed at both ends to prevent them splitting in the dryer, then they come over to the wet grading area. And there's a special stack here for the test players, the likes of Kevin Peterson, Freddie Flintoff, which have come out of the specials, regraded, and obviously the top grade for the top players.
Freddie Flintoff won't be getting his hands on this one. Here above the Weald of Kent, there used to be dozens of cricket bat manufacturers, and I've come to see one of the last of them. Hi, Andrew.
Hi.
What do we do first?
Well, we're just going to clean the blade up.
Andrew Kembar made his first cricket bat nearly 20 years ago as an apprentice to one of the oldest bat makers in the world. Today, he has his own company, Salix. He explained the process to me. That's fabulous. And all done on a jig, so you get exactly the right angle and depth. And that's ordinary sort of glue like I would use.
This is an ordinary wood PVA. Now that the handle's dry, we can start to shape the blade.
Okay. Oh, with a draw knife.
Draw knife is a beautiful tool because you can really remove a lot of timber very quickly.
Do you think I could do that?
I'm sure.
Let me do just a couple of strokes. I do not want to ruin your bat. My bat is really beginning to take shape. The all-important pressing process and some sanding and polishing, and it's almost there.
There you go.
Is that ready for use?
Well, you need to knock this in now. Gentle throwdowns, catch and practice
Okay.
over the next few weeks.
And, oh, can't I go and hit it over the pavilion at Lord's?
Well, you can, but just don't bring it back to me.
People think of Lord's as venerable, even stuffy, but they're not afraid to embrace the modern on occasion, and sometimes in a quite spectacular way. Even the stands are fairly modern, but have a look at the media centre here. It looks like something out of NASA, or maybe a sort of giant clock radio. What a fantastic view. And it wasn't just in architecture that the MCC were prepared to keep up with the times. They also embraced other modern ideas, like sponsorship. Well, according to one story anyway. In 1866, the money to buy the freehold for the ground was provided by William Nicholson, a gin distiller. Now, the colours on the labels on his gin bottles were red and yellow, and soon afterwards the MCC changed their colours to red and yellow. Before that, it had just been light blue. And talking of light blue, what world-famous event can Londoners watch for nothing? I'll give you a clue. Of course, it's the boat race. And up there you can watch the annual battle between Oxford and Cambridge and football at the same time, because that's Craven Cottage, where Fulham Football Club play. Craven Cottage, London's oldest football ground, has been here since 1896 and is named after the original house on the site. Towards the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th, football grounds sprang up all over London. More than any other sport, football has changed the way the capital looks. The Arsenal was the works team of the Royal Arsenal at Woolwich. The team moved to Highbury in 1913 and its ground became one of the most famous in the world. But the march of time is unstoppable, even by the Gunners, and the need for a bigger ground has meant a move up the road to a brand new one. The Emirates Stadium is London's newest club ground. A season ticket can cost nearly £5,000 and you can wait years for the privilege. At least the listed facade of the old ground has been saved and will form a grand entrance to some of the apartments planned for the site. The pitch will become a garden. Highbury isn't the only ground to have fallen to the bulldozer. Probably the most famous one in the world and the home of football itself is gone. The new Wembley is a worthy successor, but for many people the disappearance of the old stadium is like the loss of an old friend. The original Wembley was built in the early 1920s. Testing the structure for its ability to cope with the vast crowds anticipated took on a purely practical approach. It was completed in 1923 in time for that year's FA Cup final. The size of the crowd that turned up meant that thousands were left outside, and inside many more spilled onto the pitch. Although the Football Association, which was founded in 1863, has never been based at Wembley, the stadium seemed to take on the mantle of home to the world's favourite game. Its iconic twin towers somehow caught the public imagination in a way no one could have expected. The architects of the new Wembley believe they have created another icon with the 133-metre-high arch. Unlike the towers, the arch is an integral part of the structure. The chap who really knows about how the arch works is Alistair Lenchner, part of the original design team. Alistair, what does the arch do?
Adam, the arch actually holds the roof up. It spans over the north side of the stadium. From one end to the other, it's 315 metres long.
Wow.
And what happens is the arch is on the north side because the roof actually has sliding retractable panels to the south, which pull back to let sunlight and ventilation onto the pitch.
Forgive me for saying so, it doesn't seem to be quite upright.
Because it's an asymmetric position, the arch is stood on the north side of the stadium and the load of the roof is to the front of it, to the south. So the arch actually has to lean back slightly to get the best equilibrium position to hold the roof.
But the arch isn't taking any of the weight of this side, is it? This is separate,
No, it actually holds part of the south roof as well. The four runway girders you see, which are the guides for the moving panels, they actually span from the edge of the south of the seating bowl to the edge of the north roof, where it's picked up by the arch. In fact, the total roof load, more than half of it is held up by the arch.
With 90,000 seats, this is the largest football stadium in the world in which all the seats are under cover. And what's more, if you knew the old stadium, you'll be glad to hear that this is not so tight about the hips. I've really got room even for my knees. There's more room even than there was in the old Royal Box. And it isn't just football you can watch here. These seats at the front of the West End are all sitting on a steel platform. The whole lot retracts back so they can build a stage here and have a music festival. It's wonderful. Maybe I should sing. Or maybe not. For the moment, Wembley is the newest star in the sporting firmament. But within a few years, even newer buildings will go up at the Olympic Park, which just goes to show how sporting venues reflect the changing face of London.